No problem. Oh, there you go.
All right, I'd like to introduce Professor Curt Coffman. He's Dean of Science, Engineering, and Mathematics at Vincennes University. He's been teaching at the collegiate level for 24 years. He's previously the Dean of Biology at Vincennes University. He has his bachelor's degree in wildlife biology from Ball State and a Master of Science, Aquatic and Fisheries Biology, also from Ball State. He's been recognized by Folsom Lake College, the National Association of Biology Instructors, and Vincennes University for excellence in teaching by getting his students into the natural environment. So that's how I found him. It's great to talk with you. What interested me was I was doing a search online and I
Mhm.
found a picture of you kneeling down in a stream holding what I think is a bluegill. Um,
Probably a long ear sunfish. I kind of got it out like this.
yeah, yeah.
Good fishermen do. They lie. So if you hold your fish out in front of you like this, it looks a lot bigger. So
Oh,
that's a little trick. You
well,
look smaller, they look bigger.
I don't know that the little guy was all that happy to pose for the picture, but
Yeah,
I'm sure he got back in the water and felt much better.
yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's one of the prettier fishes in the stream. So, but yeah, that's a pretty good photo, and that's something I really enjoy doing, taking students out, learning about the natural environment, and being a fisheries guy, going out and sampling fish is certainly using my strengths to teach students that way. So
Okay.
yeah.
Um, how did you end up in wildlife biology and the climate issues and stuff?
Well, I was actually a special education major for 3 years, and luckily the program I was in at Ball State, I had enough classroom experience to see that I was already looking too forward to May, June, and July. That it just wasn't for me, and I remember that I really enjoyed biology. I grew up on a farm and grew up outdoors, and I went to the biology department, and they had a wildlife degree and a fisheries degree. The fisheries degree in the bachelor's required calculus and physics. The wildlife did not. So I chose wildlife, and I could get it done in a shorter period of time, since I had already been 3 years in. But did that, but then switched to a graduate degree in aquatic and fisheries. So I did have to take calculus, and at least a physical science. The but I spent a summer in between my bachelor's and master's, working for the Bureau of Water Quality in Muncie, Indiana, which is a part of the municipality there, and we were doing stream surveys, sampling fish, insects, and I was literally hooked, doing the fisheries, and so that's really what got me started in that. With climate, what's interesting is, when I was a wildlife major, I got to spend the summer doing research with a fellow who studied dendrochronology, which is a fancy way for saying we look at the tree ring, measure the tree rings on a tree, which indicate not only age but how they respond to stress. And trees are actually a pretty important tool in looking at historical climate and how trees have adapted to those changes, especially older trees that live longer. But you can see how they respond short term to a fire. If a fire occurred in a certain year, you can see that on the tree ring where their growth is probably stunted. You can see that in effects of acid rain. But longer trends will also show you what's going on with the climate. And so that was really my first probably exposure to understanding a little bit about how climate can change, whether it's a natural cycle or it's influenced by man-made things. And then as I went into teaching at the community college level, which is what I've done ever since graduation, and I've taught a range of courses, including environmental science. And so when you get into those types of classes, you know, the best way to learn something is to become a teacher, because you have to know that material. And so even areas, even areas of climate science that I wasn't very familiar with, I've educated myself, and just over the years, you become kind of an inch deep and a mile wide, and, and you know a lot about a little, but obviously the natural resources is an area I'm pretty solid in.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have family in Arizona and had a chance to visit them recently. And part of our trip was we drove Route 66, and we came upon a state park. It is a fossilized trees that
Mm-hmm.
Arizona used to be desert and wetlands, and now they have trees that are 50,000 years old laying there, and it's just the climate change that occurred in Arizona, and I found that very interesting.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, in our course, we've talked a lot about how climate has affected humans, how it's affected what's in the air, and what's in the water, and what's in the land.
Mm-hmm.
So I was curious, from your perspective, having the background in wildlife biology, how is climate change affecting animals?
Yeah. Um, there's several ways it's affecting wildlife. One that we've been tracking for a few decades now is the area of hibernation and migration. So there are a lot of animals, especially mammals, that will hibernate. Bears are the most famous example, but a lot of animals, bats, and of course, bats are getting hammered by fungus right now, um, but a lot of animals do at least some sort of hibernation. Squirrels are up in the trees, with making a nest over most of the winter. There's a lot of that, and we've seen that hibernation rates are becoming, the length of the hibernation is becoming less.
Hmm.
So they're entering hibernation later in the fall, and they're coming out earlier because of a warming climate, where it's not getting as cold as early, it's not getting as and it's warming up quicker. So that's that itself is a behavioral change that we can track. We can track that for a lot of animals. Migration is another. A lot. We think of a lot of birds, waterfowl migrate spring and fall. Right now, that's going on, where a lot of birds are heading back north. And again, the timing of that is changing, where they are migrating south later and they are heading back sooner. There's a fish and wildlife area north of us called Goose Pond, which is a major migratory site for waterfowl and other birds, because it's about 10,000 acres of wetland. And when they first started as a fish and wildlife area, they held a migration festival called Marsh Madness. Yeah, and it was in March. Right. And the big draw was the sandhill cranes that are there. Well, what's funny is you go there in March, the sandhill cranes aren't there anymore. They've already moved on. And so Marsh Madness is now in mid-February.
Wow.
so that they can take advantage of the really beautiful bird, the really key bird that a lot of people love to see, the sandhill crane. And that's just, so those are two, migration and even migration patterns of elk or deer that may do more of a regional type of migration. Right. Is changing the timing, how far they may go. So we're definitely seeing behavioral changes that whether that tell us something is happening, and then another good indicator, while it's not wildlife, it's the plant world. We are seeing different plants trying to migrate to either areas of higher elevation
Mm.
or areas of, going farther north. And for plants, that's not, that can be kind of hard because they don't have legs, but there's some seeds dispersed by wind, and
Right.
we're finding, we're finding trees. Like I was just reading an article where this professor who studies high alpine environments is finding Jeffrey pine up in what we would call the alpine zone, where you usually do not find them. They're
Right.
more of a mid-elevational pine tree in the Sierra Nevadas, and so we're seeing them. He's seeing where their seeds are picked up by a bird that buries them for storage. It's called the Clark's nutcracker. So this bird plants nuts all throughout the Sierras to feed on during the winter. It has this incredible map sense to remember about 90% of the seeds that it buries, and can find them in the winter for food. But the ones it doesn't find, they get distributed. And Jeffrey pines, that historically, if a Jeffrey pine seed had been put at elevation 10,000 feet elevation, it simply wouldn't survive. They're surviving now. Which is telling us that the conditions at that elevation are very different. We're seeing that with animal. Another great animal example is armadillos. Armadillos are in Indiana now, and the winter, they cannot survive harsh winters, and they have been consistently moving north as the winters are more mild, and we are fine. I don't know if we have a full resident population yet, but in the last 5 years, dozens of armadillos have been found in Indiana. Sometimes they will actually grab onto a car and hitchhike a little bit underneath, but we're seeing a lot of examples of northern migration of historically southern species or lower elevation species.
That's interesting. I've seen pictures where the tops of mountains are just clear of tree growth.
Sure.
Must be the elevation, and so that's changing. I had thought of a question while you were talking about their hibernation periods, and is it affecting their reproduction as well?
I mean, that's a good question, and I've not read anything on that. I mean, some of the cycles that some animals do. I mean, again, bears, they give birth while they're still hibernating. I mean, and hibernation isn't where you are completely unconscious, unaware of what's going on. These bears are giving birth and nursing their young, and they're staying in there. Is leaving that site, earlier, where it's still warmer, but maybe, I mean, still a lot of plants may not be producing the food, or, I mean, are food sources there at the time they're coming out? That's the question, or if they're waiting longer to hibernate, is there still food for them to find before they hibernate? And because that, storing that energy is a really key aspect of that behavior. So I don't have a good answer to that, but I could see it could have an impact, but I mean, again, I don't have anything that I could really share about that.
Interesting
Other than just
question.
conjecture. Yeah.
If you look at any sort of media, you'll see bears feeding on salmon.
Yeah.
And I imagine if migratory practices are starting to change, the salmon may or may not be there when it's time for the bear to eat and start to store fat for the winter.
Yeah. And I don't know if fish migrations are being impacted by climate change. Water temperature can definitely play a role with salmon, but again, are the bears still out and the salmon runs are over? And so they're still expending energy when the food sources are gone. That may be more likely.
That's interesting. Are you studying any certain type of climate change or how it affects the work you do or the research you do at the university?
Um, I would say the only thing again, Vincennes University is primarily a teaching university. So, not a researcher. And as a dean, I teach one class a year now. So my teaching is much less. I still do a lot of outreach. I still take a lot of students outside, and we still I think the things that I'm still very involved with is I'm involved with my monarch butterfly migration, where we have been actively sampling monarch butterflies for 15 years now, uh, uh, including with our VU's own students, but I also take fifth graders out and do it. We actually have a community day called Monarch Madness, where there's a 2-week window where the monarch butterflies migration. They migrate from the northern U.S. to Mexico every fall, and so the last 2 weeks in September are kind of the peak time for the migration here at this latitude. And we are part of 2 research projects, one with the University of Kansas called Monarch Watch, and another one with the University of Georgia called Monarch Health. And one thing that I've been seeing, again, year to year, sometimes the monarch migration gets impacted by storms or, if a storm blows through, that really can knock out a lot of butterflies. Or if they're, sometimes weather events. And one thing we are seeing with climate change is the severity of weather events seems to be increasing. And so monarchs can fly 50 to 100 miles a day during the migration. I mean, they're pretty amazing. But again, a storm or a drought in more extreme droughts are something we're seeing with climate change. Those insects need nectar. They need flowering plants, and so if we are seeing an increase in drought in different regions, they're going to have a harder time making that migration to central Mexico because of lack of food. And so those are some things that I'm certainly interested in, and I don't know that I have any data that points to any long-term change yet, but that's certainly one thing. I am also involved with invasive species, specifically a lot of plants where we definitely are seeing invasive species like kudzu, which are traditionally a southern problem. Kudzu, yeah. If you Google kudzu, you will see pictures of barns completely covered in the plant. Right. I mean, it just takes over everything. And if you drive south on 41 or 69, you get into, or you work your way to Georgia, you'll see trees just covered in this viney plant that just grows incredibly fast. And it's in Knox County. I mean, it's here, and 20, 30 years ago, kudzu, we wouldn't even consider kudzu a potential invasive. So we're seeing plants and animals we didn't have to ever expect showing up on our doorstep. And so that's certainly something as well.
Little question about the butterflies. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to be down in the Gulf for spring break, and along the beach, there was a lot of monarch butterflies just flying along the water's edge. And I noticed them because there were so many of them.
Yeah.
Do they follow a certain route, or are they just are they working off of like an internal compass, or how do they find their way?
So that's a great question. We think they somehow key into the magnetic field of the Earth. And what happens is they're in early spring, and so this is an incredible. I mean, this has nothing to do with climate change. But this is an incredible. It's a multi-generational migration, where the ones that head to Mexico in the fall are a long-lived generation where they, they're hatched probably in August, and then they end up getting to Mexico probably in October, and then they return to the same spot in Mexico, in these mountains where these trees are, and they stay there all winter long, just kind of being dormant for the most part. And then around February, March, the temperature, warming temperatures kind of stimulate them to head north. And then what will happen is they will head into northern Mexico, into Texas, into the Gulf, and they kind of just start spreading out that way. They get into the Gulf or in Texas, they find milkweed plants, which is the only plant their caterpillars can feed on. So they lay their eggs on milkweed, and those adults die after they lay their eggs. Those eggs hatch into monarch caterpillars, which feed only on milkweed plants, and then they cocoon. About 3-4 weeks later, they'll after hatching, they'll come out as an adult butterfly. They continue to head north, and they only live about a month, and then they will reproduce, lay their eggs, and die. And then another generation will continue to head north, and they do the same thing. And it's usually the 4th generation that is born in August, somewhere in northern Indiana, Minnesota, southern Canada. They're the ones that then turn around and head back to Mexico. So it's like if your parents, you were born and your parents said to you, hey, your great grandparents had this condo in central Mexico. That's where you're going to live. Good luck. I mean, it does like that.
Pack your bag.
And so it's this incredible migration. But to answer your question, I mean, they're highly concentrated there in Mexico, and they're kind of heading north, and they eventually spread as they get away from the Gulf of Mexico. They'll be spreading to the east and north and somewhat to the west. So there you see high concentrations because they really are still. There's still a good amount of them, especially, if you're, west of the, Florida Panhandle, I would expect you to see more, but I don't know. But, and in Florida, there's just a native population that doesn't migrate because it's Florida.
Right. Why leave Florida? It's warm and sunny.
That's right.
Except for the hurricanes.
Yeah.
You talked about severe weather. That was, I hadn't considered that in terms of animals and how it affects them. In the class, we'd had some discussions about how wind turbines are affecting birds by, first of all, being in their way, right. One thing, with whatever amount of power they're able to generate. Second thing was the noise and how it affects both ground animals and those. But we also had a discussion about offshore wind turbines and affecting fish. Are you familiar with any of those
not really
effects on the animals?
I'm less of a marine person. I'm more of a freshwater, and wind turbines and fish. I'll be honest. If there are impacts there, I've not read of any. But again, it's not something I've done a deep dive in. Now, obviously, birds have suffered from wind turbines, which you would think that it's not like those things are running like a fan,
Yeah. You'd be able to dodge them.
You think you'd be able to, yeah. I mean, you see how they dodge our cars when we're driving, right? Like, woo!
Yeah.
So that's always surprised me a little bit, but you were talking about how with firefighters, I think extreme weather is certainly something that fire departments are having to deal with. I mean, think about, California. I lived in California for 7 years, and when I lived there in the late 90s, early 2000s, fire season was, summer, summer until fall, and then you had the rainy season.
Right.
And that was it. Their fire season is now 365.
All year long.
I mean, they are having, where, the normal cycle of rain may or may not occur, but even, I mean, they've had some record snowpack this year, but down in Southern California, they had those devastating fires in LA over the winter. That was not normal. Having those kind of extreme fires in the what we call the rainy season, that's new. That's a new normal. And then seeing more catastrophic fires here in the Midwest and even the eastern states, like I think in New Jersey, there's something going on recently. But even here in the Midwest, I mean, fires don't usually burn out of control, but we're seeing more of that happen because of extended drought. We're seeing more of those kinds of conditions that, well, fires always happened in the,
Right.
Especially in the Great Plains. But I think but again, fires that are burning bigger and hotter is certainly something we're seeing more of as the climate's changed.
Yeah. How about the water conditions in the Midwest? You talked about being familiar with the fish in this area. More pollution, less pollution, higher temperatures. What are your thoughts about the water quality?
Yeah, water temperature is always something that's one, if you have a very shallow pond, like, your traditional farm pond, something that always has happened in the summer is where the hotter, warmer water is, the less oxygen it holds. And so in a shallow pond, the conditions can happen, especially if you have aquatic plants and algae on the pond where they consume oxygen as part of their metabolism for photosynthesis. They can deplete the oxygen level to a point where you get a fish kill. I would say we are seeing, and even, with, I would say warmer temperatures in rivers, streams, ponds for longer periods of time, create stressful conditions for aquatic organisms, whether it's fish or amphibians. I think another thing that climate change is doing that a lot of people aren't aware of is, a major greenhouse gas is carbon dioxide.
Mm-hmm.
Carbon dioxide mixes in with water very easily. And as you increase carbon dioxide in the water, it changes from carbon dioxide to carbonic acid. And so the pH of the water itself is becoming more acidic. Mm. And so you have warmer water. You have a lot of fish. Some fish, like catfish, can tolerate low oxygen and low pH. But a lot of fish, like your sport fish, bass, bluegill, trout are much more sensitive. As water temperature and the pH are changing, there are some places here in southern Indiana that you can, maybe where there's a cooler, like some of the old coal mine lakes, and they stock rainbow trout in there.
Right.
Will that change? That's definitely possible. Or there's areas where, or there might be pike or muskie, which are our cool water fish. There's still some places in southern Indiana where you can find that. Will that change? Yeah, but the pH is a bigger issue where that will affect lots of different organisms, and especially amphibians, which have a very thin skin. And so more acidic water is going to have a bigger impact, not on just the adults, but it will probably dramatically affect reproduction because, their eggs are in that water. They have to be moist. And so a more acidic environment is probably going to lead to lower reproductive rates.
Oh, yeah, that would affect quite a bit. I just got a flash up note that our time is starting to wind down here.
Yeah.
And they'll shut us off in a minute. If you had, our audience is going to be grad students working in all sorts of different areas, if some in policy and some in just different areas of government. If you had a recommendation that you'd like to pass on, something that people could help, or undergrad or grad students could help
Well,
with, what would it be?
I think in the political climate we are in, this is not a this is a hard discussion to have from a policy standpoint right now. So I would say go local and be practical. What are things that you can do locally to support where you live that are, whether it is planting pollinator gardens that support insects, or just different individual things, or be involved with local groups that are making a difference where you live, is probably going to be more effective in the next 4 years than trying to do policy at a state, in Indiana, at a state or the federal level. Right now, in Indiana and the federal level, that's going to be a much harder, maybe impossible sell. So I would go local and be practical and find the people that are. Mr. Rogers said, look for the helpers. Who are the people doing good work?
Right.
Partner with them. Don't rebuild the wheel.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to talk with me. I really appreciate it. It's nice to meet you.
Great to meet you, Steve.
And I'm going to terminate the recording now. So thanks.
All right. Good luck to you.
Thanks.